Grandma Betty, you seriously text like a dinosaur. It's embarrassing. My 17-year-old granddaughter, Sophia, rolled her eyes as she snatched my phone from my hands during our family brunch at the Riverside Country Club. Look at this. You actually type out, "Okay, dear," instead of just sending K. And why do you use so many periods? It makes you sound angry. The entire table erupted in laughter. My daughter, Rebecca, my son-in-law, Marcus, and even my youngest grandson, Tyler, joined in the mockery as Sophia held up my phone for everyone to see my text messages. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other Sunday in the past 3 years since my husband George passed away. I'd driven my modest Honda Civic to the club, wearing a simple floral dress from Kohl's, carrying my worn leather purse that had seen better days. The hostess always seated me at the same corner table, the one with the slightly wobbly leg that the staff never seemed to remember to fix. I didn't mind. I was grateful my family made time for these weekly brunches, even if I often felt like an afterthought. Rebecca had been checking her phone throughout the meal, responding to messages with lightning speed, her fingers dancing across the screen in ways that seemed almost magical to me. Marcus was doing the same, occasionally showing her something that made them both chuckle. Even Tyler, barely 14, was texting someone under the table with the practiced stealth of a teenager who'd mastered the art of covert communication. I'd been trying to keep up with their conversations about apps and social media platforms I'd never heard of, nodding along when they mentioned TikTok dances and Instagram stories and something called Discord that Tyler used to talk to his friends. When Sophia asked if I'd seen her latest post, I'd fumbled with my phone, squinting at the small screen, trying to navigate to whatever app she was referring to. That's when she'd grabbed my phone in exasperation, leaning to her pronouncement about my dinosaur-like texting habits. The laughter felt like tiny needles pricking my skin. Not because I was hurt by their amusement, but because of the dismissive way they looked at me afterward, as if my inability to master their digital language confirmed something they'd all been thinking. "Mom, you really should learn to text properly," Rebecca said, her tone carrying the patience one might use with a small child. "It would help you connect better with people your age, too. Mrs. Patterson from your book club probably thinks you're upset with her when you send those formal messages." "I'm not upset with anyone," I replied quietly, accepting my phone back from Sophia. "I just like to communicate clearly." "But that's not how communication works anymore, Grandma," Sophia continued, her voice taking on that lecturing tone teenagers perfected when explaining the obvious to the obviously clueless. "Everything's about efficiency now. Quick responses, abbreviations, emojis to show emotion. Your way is just old." Marcus chimed in with what he probably thought was helpful advice. "Betty, maybe you should take one of those senior citizen classes at the community center. They teach digital literacy for older adults. It might help you feel less isolated." Less isolated. The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I wasn't isolated by choice. I was isolated because everyone around me had decided that my way of doing things was wrong, outdated, embarrassing. They'd created a world where value was measured by your ability to communicate in abbreviated sentences and express complex emotions through tiny yellow faces. You know what the real problem is, Sophia? Grandma doesn't understand that she's stuck in the past. Like, she still writes checks at the grocery store. She calls instead of texting. She prints out emails. It's like she's afraid of modern life. The entire conversation continued around me, each family member contributing their observations about my technological shortcomings. Rebecca mentioned how I still used a paper calendar instead of the digital one on my phone. Marcus brought up my preference for calling businesses instead of using their websites. Tyler added that I was the only person he knew who still watched television shows when they actually aired instead of streaming them later. I sat in my chair, cutting my Eggs Benedict into precise pieces, listening to my family dissect my life choices as if I weren't sitting right there. They weren't being cruel, exactly. They genuinely seemed to believe they were helping me understand why I was struggling to fit into their world. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't struggling. I was choosing.
After brunch, as we walked to the parking lot, Rebecca linked her arm through mine in that way she had done since she was a little girl. Mom, we're not trying to be mean. We just worry about you sometimes. You seem so disconnected from everything. I patted her hand, forcing a smile I didn't feel. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just different, I suppose. Different is okay, Grandma, Sophia called from behind us, already absorbed in her phone screen again. But being a dinosaur isn't cute anymore. It's just sad. I drove home in silence, Sophia's words echoing in my head. Sad. That's what my granddaughter thought of me. Not wise, not experienced, not valuable. Sad. A relic from a bygone era who couldn't adapt to the modern world and therefore deserved to be quietly tolerated until I became too much of a burden. My house on Maple Street was modest by most standards. A 2-bedroom ranch with a small garden that I tended myself and a garage that barely fit my aging Honda. The neighbors were kind, but distant. The sort of polite relationships that involved waving from driveways and discussing the weather when we happened to retrieve our mail at the same time. Inside, the house was decorated with furniture George and I had accumulated over 43 years of marriage. Solid pieces that had lasted through raising Rebecca, hosting countless family dinners, and weathering the storms of a life well lived. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades, from Rebecca's baby pictures to recent shots of the grandchildren at various milestones. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in George's recliner, the one piece of furniture I couldn't bring myself to replace, even though the fabric was wearing thin. This was where I did my thinking, my planning, my worrying.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Today, I was doing all three. The truth was, I understood technology better than my family realized. I'd been using computers for work long before they were born, back when operating systems required actual knowledge to navigate. I'd adapted to smartphones, learned to use email, even mastered online banking. I chose to text in complete sentences because I believed words mattered. I chose to call instead of text because I valued hearing people's voices. I chose to write checks because I liked the physical connection to my financial transactions. These weren't the choices of someone afraid of change. They were the choices of someone who understood that newer didn't always mean better, that efficiency wasn't always more important than intention, that the speed of communication mattered less than its substance. But my family saw only what they wanted to see, an elderly woman clinging to outdated methods because she couldn't learn new ones. They pitied me for my limitations, rather than respecting me for my choices. And that pity had gradually transformed into dismissal. I thought about Sophia's college fund, the one I'd been contributing to since she was born. Every month for 17 years, I'd transferred money from my savings account to an educational trust I'd established through my financial advisor. The amount had grown significantly over time, compounded by careful investments and additional contributions on birthdays and holidays. Neither Sophia nor Rebecca knew about the fund. I'd kept it as a surprise, planning to reveal it when Sophia graduated high school and started making college plans. I'd imagined the joy on her face when she realized her grandmother had been providing for her future all along, the way her attitude toward me might soften when she understood that the dinosaur had been quietly ensuring her dreams could come true. Now, sitting in George's chair with the taste of my family's laughter still bitter in my mouth, I wondered if that reveal would be worth it. Would Sophia be grateful, or would she simply see it as another example of her grandmother's inability to communicate properly? Would she appreciate the sacrifice behind those monthly contributions, or would she focus on the fact that I hadn't told her about it in the first place? My phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. "Thanks for brunch, Mom. Sorry if we were a little hard on you about the texting thing. We love you just the way you are." I stared at the message, noting the casual abbreviation and the emoji heart at the end. We love you just the way you are. Except they didn't, really. They loved the version of me that didn't embarrass them with my dinosaur texting habits. They loved the grandmother who quietly accepted their gentle mockery and appreciated their patience with my technological deficiencies. I started to type a response, then stopped.
Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Patricia Morse, my attorney. Patricia had been handling my legal affairs since George's death, helping me navigate the complexities of estate planning and trust management. She was one of the few people who understood the full scope of my financial situation. My fingers moved slowly across the keyboard, deliberately forming complete sentences with proper punctuation. Good afternoon, Patricia. I hope this message finds you well. I would like to schedule an appointment to discuss some changes to my estate planning documents, specifically regarding the educational trust established for my granddaughter, Sophia. Please let me know your availability this week. Thank you for your time and consideration. Best regards, Betty. I read the message twice before sending it, then sat back in the recliner to wait for her response. Patricia had always been quick to reply, even on weekends. She understood that legal matters rarely waited for convenient timing. Her response came within 20 minutes. Hello, Betty. I can see you Monday at 2 p.m. if that works for you. Is everything all right? Your message sounds more formal than usual. I smiled at her observation. Patricia knew me well enough to recognize when something had shifted in my tone. Monday at 2 p.m. works perfectly. Everything is fine. I simply need to make some adjustments to reflect my current thinking about family relationships. I'll see you then. The rest of Sunday passed quietly. I tended my garden, watered the tomatoes that were just beginning to ripen, deadheaded the roses that George had planted for our 20th anniversary. Physical work had always helped me think clearly, and today I needed clarity more than ever. As evening approached, I found myself looking through old photo albums, studying pictures of Sophia from various ages. There she was at 3, gap-toothed and giggling as I pushed her on the swing set in my backyard. At 7, concentrating intently as I taught her to braid friendship bracelets. At 12, rolling her eyes, but still hugging me tight after I had given her a birthday present she claimed was totally random, but actually pretty cool. When had that affectionate, occasionally exasperated granddaughter become the dismissive teenager who found me embarrassing? When had my careful, complete sentences become a source of shame rather than a sign of care? When had my presence shifted from welcome to tolerated? I closed the album and made my way to my small home office, a converted second bedroom where I managed my finances and correspondence. The room was organized exactly the way I liked it, with filing cabinets labeled by category and a desk that held only the essentials. My computer, a lamp, a cup holder for my tea, and a small framed photo of George on our wedding day. I opened my laptop, an action that would probably amuse my family since they assumed I was intimidated by technology. The truth was, I'd been managing my investments online for years, tracking market trends and adjusting my portfolio with the same careful attention I'd once given to balancing my household budget. The numbers on my screen told a story my family would never have imagined. What they saw as a modest widow living on a fixed income was actually a woman who'd spent decades building financial security through careful planning and conservative investments. George and I had lived well below our means throughout our marriage, saving and investing with the discipline of people who'd lived through economic uncertainty. The house on Maple Street was paid off, had been for 15 years. My monthly expenses were minimal because I chose to live simply, not because I had to. The Honda Civic was 8 years old because it ran perfectly and served my needs, not because I couldn't afford something newer. The clothes from Kohl's and the worn leather purse were choices, not necessities. My investment portfolio was worth more than Rebecca made in 5 years at her marketing job. The savings account I had designated for emergencies could cover my living expenses for a decade. And the various trusts and funds I'd established, including Sophia's college fund, represented a level of financial planning that most people never achieved. I'd hidden this security partly out of habit and partly out of protection. George and I had learned early in our marriage that family dynamics changed when money entered the equation. People started viewing you differently, treating you as a resource rather than a person. They began to expect things, to feel entitled to your help, to make assumptions about your obligations to them. So we lived modestly and kept our financial success private. Even Rebecca didn't know the full extent of what George and I had built together. She knew I was comfortable because I'd been able to maintain the house after George died and didn't seem to struggle with bills, but comfortable was a far cry from the reality of my situation. Now, as I stared at the numbers on my screen, I realized that my decision to hide my financial security had contributed to my family's perception of me as a burden rather than a benefit.
They saw a struggling widow who needed their patience and understanding, not a successful woman who'd been quietly funding their opportunities for years. Sophia's college fund contained enough money to cover 4 years at any university in the country, including room and board, books, and living expenses. The fund was structured to grow over time, meaning that by the time she graduated, there would likely be money left over for graduate school or a down payment on her first house. I'd been proud of this gift, this invisible foundation I'd built for her future. Every month when I made the transfer, I'd imagined her gratitude when she finally understood what her dinosaur grandmother had been doing all along. I'd pictured her calling me to share her excitement about being accepted to her dream school, knowing that finances wouldn't be a barrier to her education. But after today's brunch, I wondered if I'd been naive. Would Sophia be grateful, or would she simply see the money as her due? Would she appreciate the sacrifice and planning behind the gift, or would she focus on my failure to communicate about it in the way she preferred? I closed the laptop and returned to the living room, settling once again in George's chair. Tomorrow, I would meet with Patricia and make some changes to my estate planning documents. The conversation would be difficult, but necessary. It was time to stop hiding who I really was, even if the revelation came with consequences I wasn't prepared for. Outside my window, the street was quiet except for the occasional car passing by. My neighbors' houses glowed with the blue light of television screens and the warmer yellow light of table lamps. Normal families having normal Sunday evenings, probably not questioning their worth or debating their relationships with their children and grandchildren. I envied them their certainty, their comfortable routines, their apparent freedom from the kind of fundamental questioning that had consumed my thoughts since this morning. But I also knew that appearances could be deceiving. Every family had its complexities, its hidden tensions, its moments of reckoning. Tomorrow, I would begin to address mine. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that October brought to our part of Pennsylvania. I dressed carefully for my appointment with Patricia, choosing a navy suit that George had always said made me look professional and confident. It was one of the few expensive pieces in my wardrobe, purchased years ago for a special occasion I could no longer remember. I arrived at Patricia's office 15 minutes early, as was my habit. The waiting area was decorated in warm browns and soft greens, with legal journals stacked neatly on side tables and a coffee station that offered better options than most restaurants. Patricia's assistant, a young man named David, who always remembered to ask about my garden, offered me coffee and assured me that Patricia would see me promptly at 2. Patricia emerged from her office exactly on time, as she always did. She was a woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that inspired confidence in her clients. She'd built her practice by specializing in estate planning for what she called quiet wealth, people who'd accumulated significant assets without fanfare and needed careful strategies to protect and transfer their resources. "Betty, it's wonderful to see you," she said, shaking my hand with genuine warmth. "You look lovely. How are you feeling?" "I'm well, thank you, and ready to make some changes." Her office was a reflection of her personality, organized, elegant, and designed for serious conversations. We settled into comfortable chairs near a window that overlooked the town's main street, where Monday afternoon life proceeded at its usual unhurried pace. "Your message yesterday was unusually formal," Patricia began, her tone gentle but probing. "Has something happened with your family?" I'd been thinking about how to explain the situation without sounding petty or vindictive.
The truth was complex, involving layers of hurt and disappointment that had been building for years. But Patricia needed to understand the context for the changes I wanted to make. My granddaughter Sophia informed me yesterday that I text like a dinosaur. The entire family found this quite amusing. They seem to believe that my inability to communicate in their preferred style makes me an object of pity rather than respect. Patricia's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was listening more carefully than her casual posture might indicate. This wasn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern of treatment that's been developing since George died. They see me as a burden who needs their patience, a relic from another era who can't adapt to modern life. They pity me for my limitations rather than respecting me for my choices. "And how does this relate to your estate planning?" Patricia asked. I took a deep breath, knowing that once I spoke the words aloud, there would be no taking them back. I want to restructure Sophia's educational trust. Instead of revealing it as a graduation gift, I want it to become conditional on her demonstrating genuine respect for who I am, not just tolerance for who she thinks I should become. Patricia was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "That's a significant change from your original intentions. Can you help me understand what kind of conditions you're considering?" I want her to know that the fund exists, but I want access to it tied to our relationship. If she continues to treat me as an embarrassing reminder of an outdated world, then perhaps she should fund her own education. If she can learn to value wisdom over Wi-Fi speed, respect over rapid response times, then the money will be there for her. Betty, I need to ask this directly. Are you making this decision out of hurt feelings, or is this a strategic choice about how you want to impact your granddaughter's character development? It was exactly the kind of question I'd expected from Patricia, and exactly the reason I trusted her judgment. She wasn't going to let me make a decision I might regret without ensuring I'd thought through completely. "Both," I admitted. "I'm hurt by how my family treats me, but I'm also concerned about the kind of person Sophia is becoming. She's 17 years old and already dismissive of anyone who doesn't meet her standards for modern relevance. What happens when she encounters professors who don't communicate the way she prefers? What happens when she enters a workplace where wisdom and experience matter more than technological fluency?" Patricia nodded slowly. "And you believe that making her college funding conditional on treating you with respect will teach her these lessons?" "I believe that consequences teach lessons words cannot. Right now, Sophia has no reason to question her attitude toward me. She gets to mock my communication style and still benefit from my love and support. There's no cost to her dismissiveness, no reason for her to examine whether her perspective might be limited. What about Rebecca? How do you think she'll react to these changes?" I'd been dreading this question, but I knew it was necessary to address. "Rebecca will be angry. She'll think I'm being manipulative or vindictive. She doesn't know about the extent of the financial support I've provided over the years, so she won't understand that this isn't about withholding help. It's about requiring respect as a condition of help. Are you prepared for that conflict?" "I'm prepared for the consequences of finally being honest about who I am and what I expect from my relationships." Patricia made notes as we talked, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the specific structure I wanted for the modified trust. We discussed timelines, conditions, and the legal language needed to ensure my intentions would be clearly understood and properly enforced.
"I have one more suggestion," Patricia said as our meeting drew to a close. "Before we finalize these changes, I'd like you to consider having a direct conversation with Sophia, not about the money, but about how her words and actions affect you. Give her an opportunity to understand your perspective before you implement consequences she doesn't know are coming. And if she dismisses my concerns the way she dismissed my texting style, then you'll know you've given her every opportunity to choose a different path. The consequences will be her choice, not your punishment." I agreed to consider her suggestion, though I suspected I already knew how such a conversation would go. Sophia had made her opinion of me quite clear. But
Patricia was right that fairness demanded I give her a chance to reconsider before I changed the fundamental dynamics of our relationship. That evening, I composed a text message to Sophia. I wrote it 3 different ways, deleting each draft before starting over. Finally, I settled on something simple and direct. Sophia, I would like to have a conversation with you about our relationship and how we communicate with each other. Would you be willing to meet me for coffee this week? I promise to keep my dinosaur texting to a minimum. I added a smiley face emoji at the end, then deleted it, then added it back. If I was going to meet my granddaughter on her communication terms, I might as well try to speak her language. Her response came back within minutes. Sure, Grandma, but can we make it quick? I have practice and homework and like a million other things this week. No capital letters, minimal punctuation, and the subtle implication that spending time with me was an inconvenience to be managed rather than an opportunity to be enjoyed. But she'd agreed to meet, which was more than I'd expected. We arranged to meet Wednesday afternoon at Starbucks, a location Sophia had suggested because it was convenient to her other activities. I didn't point out that it was a 30-minute drive from my house, while the local diner was within walking distance of her school. This wasn't the time to quibble about logistics. Wednesday afternoon, I arrived at Starbucks 10 minutes early and ordered my coffee, a simple medium roast with cream, which the barista insisted on calling a Pike Place with room. I found a quiet table near the window and waited for Sophia to arrive. She rushed in 12 minutes late, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her phone in her hand. She was beautiful in the unconscious way of 17-year-olds, all long limbs and glossy hair, and the kind of confidence that came from never having experienced real failure or loss. Sorry I'm late, Grandma, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. Traffic was crazy, and I had to stop by my locker, and then Jessica texted me about this thing with Drama Club. She had ordered her coffee on her way in, something elaborate with multiple adjectives that had cost more than my monthly coffee budget. And now she sat staring it while checking her phone for messages she had missed in the 30 seconds since entering the building. Thank you for making time to meet with me, I said, choosing my words carefully. I know your schedule is busy. Yeah, it really is. Senior year is like insane. I have college applications and SATs and all this drama with my friends about prom dates, even though prom isn't until spring. Plus, soccer season just started and Coach Martinez is being super intense about conditioning. She delivered this information while continuing to check her phone, not quite making eye contact. I wondered if she even realized she was doing it, or if multitasking had become so natural that focusing on one conversation felt unnatural. Sophia, could you put your phone away for a few minutes? I'd like to have your full attention for this conversation. She looked up surprised, as if the request was unusual. Oh yeah, sorry, I was just checking to see if Mom texted about dinner tonight. She placed the phone face down on the table, but I could see her glancing at it every few seconds. I wanted to talk to you about what happened at brunch on Sunday, about your comment that I text like a dinosaur. Sophia's face immediately shifted into defensive mode. Grandma, I wasn't trying to be mean. It's just that your texting style is really formal and kind of old-fashioned. I was just trying to help you understand how people communicate now. I understand how people communicate now. What I don't understand is why my choice to communicate differently makes me worthy of mockery. It wasn't mockery, it was just observation. Like, when you text in complete sentences with proper punctuation, it comes across as angry or upset. People don't know how to interpret it. What people? You know, people our age, my friends, people who text normally. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice gentle but firm. Sophia, I've been texting for over a decade. I choose to write in complete sentences because I believe words matter. I choose to use proper punctuation because I want to communicate clearly. These aren't the choices of someone who doesn't understand technology. They're the choices of someone who has different values about communication. She stared at me for a moment, clearly processing this information. But why would you choose to communicate in a way that makes people think you're upset with them? Why do you assume that clear, respectful communication means someone is upset? When did we decide that abbreviations and casual language are the only ways to show warmth or friendliness? Sophia picked up her coffee cup, buying time while she considered her response. It's just how things are now, Grandma. Communication has evolved. It's more efficient, more casual, more connected to help people actually talk. And what about the people who choose not to evolve in that direction? Are we dinosaurs who deserve to be laughed at? I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? The question hung in the air between us. Sophia shifted in her chair, glanced at her phone, then looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I guess I meant that you seem stuck in the past sometimes. Like you do things the hard way when there's easier options. And it makes me worry that you're not keeping up with the world around you. What if I told you that I keep up with the world just fine, but I choose to engage with it on my own terms?
Then I'd ask why you choose to make things harder for yourself. I smiled, recognizing something of myself in her stubborn logic. What if I told you that what looks hard to you actually feels more meaningful to me? That taking time to write complete sentences feels more respectful than sending abbreviations? That calling someone instead of texting feels more personal and caring? Sophia considered this, absently stirring her coffee. I never thought about it like that. But Grandma, you have to admit that your way takes longer and isn't always practical. Like, if I'm in class and need to text Mom about picking me up early, I can't write a formal paragraph. I need to send something quick. Of course. And in that situation, efficiency makes perfect sense. But when we're having a family brunch and discussing my communication style, efficiency isn't the primary concern. Respect should be. Respect? Sophia, when you held up my phone and announced that I text like a dinosaur, and when everyone laughed, how do you think that made me feel? She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the condensation from her coffee cup. I guess, embarrassed? Beyond embarrassed. It made me feel dismissed. It made me feel like my way of caring about communication was wrong, outdated, worthy of mockery. It made me feel like you see me as a burden to be tolerated, rather than a person to be respected. Sophia's face flushed slightly. Grandma, that's not how I see you. Isn't it? When you describe my texting as dinosaur-like, when you suggest I need classes for senior citizens, when you roll your eyes at my communication choices, what message do you think you're sending? I think I'm trying to help you connect better with people. What if I told you that I connect just fine with people who value the same things I do? What if the problem isn't my communication style, but the assumption that there's only one right way to communicate? Sophia stared into her coffee cup, processing this perspective. When she looked up, there was something different in her expression. Not defensiveness, but genuine confusion. So, you're saying that when I try to help you text more normally, I'm actually being disrespectful? I'm saying that when you assume your way is automatically better, when you mock my choices instead of trying to understand them, when you treat me like I need to be fixed rather than respected, then yes, you're being disrespectful. But I love you, Grandma. I don't want you to feel left out or disconnected. I know you love me, but love without respect isn't enough. And right now, I don't feel like you respect who I am or the choices I make. Sophia was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window at the parking lot where cars came and went in the eternal dance of suburban commerce. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller than before. I never thought about it like that. I guess I just assumed that if something was easier or more efficient, it was automatically better. And I thought that if you weren't doing things the easy way, it meant you didn't know about the easy way. And now? Now I think maybe I was being kind of arrogant. Like assuming that my way was the only right way.
I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Sophia, you're 17 years old. It's natural to think that your generation has figured out things that previous generations missed. But wisdom often looks like stubbornness to youth, and tradition often looks like resistance to change. So what do I do now? How do I respect your choices better? Start by questioning your assumptions. When you see me doing something differently than you would do it, ask yourself whether my way might have value you haven't considered. When you feel the urge to correct or improve me, ask yourself whether I actually need improvement or whether I'm simply making different choices. And what if your way really doesn't make sense to me? Then ask me about it instead of mocking it. Try to understand my reasoning before you dismiss it. Give me the same courtesy you'd want someone to give you when they don't understand your choices. Sophia nodded slowly, her thumb tracing circles on the table. Grandma, I'm sorry about Sunday. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. I really was trying to help, but I can see how it came across as mean. Thank you for that apology. It means a lot to me. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are there other things I do that make you feel disrespected? Because if there are, I want to know so I can change them. I considered her question carefully. This was the opening I'd hoped for, the chance to address the broader patterns that had been troubling me. But I also knew that too much honesty too quickly could overwhelm her good intentions. Sometimes I feel like you see me as someone who needs to be managed rather than someone who has valuable perspectives to offer. When you talk about my life choices as problems to be solved rather than decisions to be respected, it makes me feel like you don't trust my judgment. Like what kinds of decisions? My choice to live in a modest house instead of something larger.
My choice to drive a reliable older car instead of something flashier. My choice to spend my time and money on things that matter to me, rather than things that might impress other people. Sophia looked confused. But those choices make sense if you're on a fixed income. We just worried that you might be struggling financially and too proud to ask for help. I almost laughed at the irony, but managed to keep my expression neutral. What if I told you that my choices have nothing to do with financial limitations? Then why would you choose to live so simply when you could afford better? Because better is subjective. Because I value security over luxury. Because I'd rather spend money on experiences and relationships than on possessions. Because living simply gives me freedom that living expensively would not. I never thought about it like that. Most people don't. They assume that if someone has money, they should spend it on visible symbols of success. But what if success means something different to different people? Sophia was quiet again, processing this information. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced at it automatically before catching herself and turning the phone over again. Grandma, can I tell you something? Of course. Sometimes I feel like I don't really know you. Like, I know you're my grandma, and I know you love me, but I don't know what you think about things, or what's important to you, or what you did before you were just my grandma. Her words hit me harder than I'd expected. In my effort to be the perfect grandmother, the supportive background figure in their lives, I'd apparently erased myself so completely that my own granddaughter didn't know who I was. What would you like to know? Everything. What was it like when you were my age? What did you want to be when you grew up? What's the most exciting thing you've ever done? What do you worry about? What makes you happy? For the next hour, I found myself telling Sophia stories I hadn't shared in years. About my childhood during a time when families had one television and children played outside until dark.
about meeting her grandfather in college and knowing immediately that he was the person I wanted to build a life with, about the career I'd built in finance before it was common for women to work in that field, about the places we'd traveled, the dreams we'd pursued, the challenges we'd overcome together. Sophia listened with the kind of attention I hadn't seen from her in years, asking questions and making connections I wouldn't have expected. When I told her about the time George and I had hiked the Appalachian Trail for our anniversary, she couldn't believe her reserved grandmother had ever done anything so adventurous. The conversation with Sophia had revealed more than I'd expected, but it had also crystallized something that had been forming in my mind for weeks. As I drove home from Starbucks, her words echoed in my head. "I feel like I don't really know you." The truth was, she didn't know me. None of them did. I'd spent so many years being the version of myself that made everyone comfortable that I'd forgotten who I actually was underneath all those careful performances. The modest grandmother who needed their patience, the technologically challenged widow who appreciated their help, the financially struggling retiree who was grateful for their concern. None of those women were entirely false, but none of them were entirely true either. That evening, I called Patricia back to confirm that I wanted to proceed with restructuring Sophia's trust. But as we talked through the details, I realized that the college fund was just the beginning. If I was going to stop hiding who I really was, then everything needed to change. Patricia, I want to make additional modifications to my estate planning. Comprehensive ones. What kind of modifications? I want Rebecca to understand the full scope of my financial situation. I want both my children and grandchildren to know exactly what I've been capable of all these years, and exactly what I've been providing without their knowledge. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Betty, that's a significant shift from the privacy you've maintained for decades. Are you certain you're ready for those conversations? I'm certain that I'm tired of being underestimated by my own family. We scheduled another meeting for the following week to discuss the broader changes I wanted to make. But I knew that restructuring legal documents was only part of what needed to happen. The real change would come from finally being honest about who I was and what I expected from the people I loved. Thursday morning brought an unexpected text from Rebecca. "Mom, Sophia told you two had a good talk yesterday. She said she learned some things about you that she didn't know before. I'm glad you're connecting better." I stared at the message, wondering how much Sophia had actually shared with her mother. Probably not the parts about feeling disrespected or questioning assumptions about my choices. More likely, she'd focused on the stories I'd told about my younger years, the adventures and achievements that painted me as more interesting than they had previously realized. I decided to test this theory. "Rebecca, I've been thinking that perhaps it's time I was more open about various aspects of my life. Would you and Marcus be available for dinner this weekend? I'd like to cook for you." Her response came quickly. "That sounds wonderful. We'd love to come. Can we bring anything?" "Just yourselves and an open mind." I spent the rest of the week planning the menu and preparing for conversations I'd been avoiding for years. I chose to cook George's favorite meal, the one I'd made for special occasions throughout our marriage. Herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and the chocolate cake recipe I'd perfected over decades of practice. Food had always been my way of showing love, and if I was going to have difficult conversations, I wanted them surrounded by comfort. Saturday evening, Rebecca and Marcus arrived promptly at 6, as they always did. Rebecca brought flowers from her garden, a tradition that dated back to her childhood. Marcus carried a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, chosen with the kind of careful consideration he gave to all his purchases. "Mom, something smells incredible," Rebecca said, kissing me in the cheek as she handed me the flowers.
"You've outdone yourself. It's Dad's favorite meal," I replied, arranging the flowers in the vase George had given me for our 10th anniversary. I thought it was appropriate for the conversation we're going to have. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Should we be worried about this mysterious conversation?" "Not worried, but perhaps prepared to see me differently than you have in the past." During dinner, we talked about familiar topics.
Rebecca's work at the marketing firm, Marcus's law practice, their plans for updating their kitchen, Sophia's college application process. Normal family conversation that felt comfortable and safe. I let them settle into the familiar rhythms before introducing the topics that would change everything. I want to talk to you about Sophia's college funding, I said as I served the chocolate cake. Mom, we've told you before that you don't need to worry about contributing to her education, Rebecca replied automatically. Marcus and I have been saving since she was born. We know you're on a fixed income now, and we don't expect you to stretch your budget for college expenses. What if I told you that I'm not on a fixed income? Marcus paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. What do you mean? I mean that the assumption you've all made about my financial situation is incorrect. Dramatically incorrect. Rebecca looked confused. But Mom, you live in this small house, you drive that old car, you shop at discount stores. If you had more money, wouldn't you live differently? Why would I live differently if I'm happy with how I live now? Because, Rebecca struggled to find words, because people with money don't usually choose to live like they don't have money. I walked to my desk and retrieved the folder I'd prepared, the one containing financial statements and investment summaries that told the real story of my life since George died. I placed it on the table between them. Your father and I spent 43 years building financial security. We lived modestly, saved diligently, and invested carefully. When he died, I inherited not just his love and memories, but also the foundation we'd built together. Marcus opened the folder, his lawyer's eyes scanning the documents with professional interest. His expression shifted from curiosity to surprise to something approaching shock. Betty, these investment balances, he looked up at me with new respect. These are substantial portfolios. How substantial? Rebecca asked, leaning over to see the papers her husband was reviewing. Your mother has assets worth approximately $4.7 million. Rebecca stared at me as if I'd suddenly sprouted wings. $4.7 million? Conservative investments, diversified holdings, and 30 years of compound growth, I explained calmly. Your father was excellent with money, and I learned everything he had to teach me. But why didn't you tell us? Rebecca's voice was barely above a whisper. Why let us think you were struggling financially? Because I wasn't struggling. You assumed I was struggling because I chose to live simply. There's a difference. Marcus was still reviewing the documents, his expression growing more amazed with each page. Betty, you've been managing this portfolio yourself? With help from my financial advisor, yes. I review all investment decisions personally and make final choices based on my risk tolerance and long-term goals. This is incredible. You've outperformed most professional fund managers over the past 5 years. Rebecca looked between her husband and me, clearly struggling to process this information. Mom, I don't understand. If you have this much money, why do you live like you're barely getting by? I don't live like I'm barely getting by. I live like someone who values security over luxury, substance over appearances, and meaning over material possessions. Those are choices, not limitations. But the house, the car, the clothes. The house is paid off and perfectly suited to my needs. The car is reliable and efficient. The clothes are comfortable and appropriate. Why would I change any of that just because I could afford to? Marcus set down the financial statements and looked at me with something that might have been admiration. You've been hiding in plain sight, living below your means while building wealth that most people only dream of. I've been living according to my values while protecting myself from the complications that visible wealth can create. What kind of complications? Rebecca asked. I considered how much to reveal about the patterns I had observed over the years, the way relationships changed when money entered the equation. People treat you differently when they know you have money. They start seeing you as a resource instead of a person. They make assumptions about your obligations to them. They question your decisions about how you spend your time and money. We would never do that, Rebecca protested. Would you not?
When you assume I need your patience because I text incomplete sentences, aren't you treating me as someone who needs to be managed? When you suggest I take senior citizen classes to learn about technology, aren't you assuming I'm incapable rather than different? When you worry about my financial security without asking me about it directly, aren't you making decisions about what's best for me without including me in the conversation? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing these questions. I never thought about it like that. I thought we were being caring and supportive. I know you did, but care without respect isn't enough, and support that's based on false assumptions isn't really supportive. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with new eyes. So what changes now that we know the truth? Everything, I said simply, starting with Sophia's college fund. I retrieved another folder from my desk, this one containing the documentation for the educational trust I'd established when Sophia was born. I placed it next to the investment statements, watching their faces as they realized what they were looking at. Sophia's college fund currently contains $647,000, I said, watching Rebecca's face go pale. Enough to cover 4 years at any university in the country, with money left over for graduate school if she chooses that path. $600,000? Rebecca's voice was barely audible. I've been contributing to this fund every month for 17 years. I planned to reveal it as a graduation gift, a surprise that would allow Sophia to pursue her dreams without financial constraints. Planned? Marcus caught the past tense immediately. Yes, planned, but recent events have made me reconsider the wisdom of that approach. I told them about the conversation with Sophia, about the pattern of dismissive treatment I'd been experiencing, about my growing concern that revealing the fund as a surprise gift would teach Sophia that disrespect has no consequences. So, what are you proposing instead? Rebecca asked, though I could see in her expression that she was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. I'm restructuring the trust to make access conditional on demonstrated respect for our relationship. If Sophia can learn to value wisdom over technology trends, respect over rapid communication, and substance over appearances, then the money will be available for her education. If she continues to treat me as an embarrassing relic who needs to be tolerated rather than respected, then she can fund her own college experience. Rebecca stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Mom, you can't hold money over her head to force her to treat you differently. That's manipulation. Is it? Or is it natural consequences for choices she's already making? Right now, Sophia gets to mock my communication style, dismiss my life choices, and treat me like a burden while still benefiting from my love and financial support. Where's the incentive for her to examine her behavior or consider my perspective? She's 17 years old. Teenagers are self-centered by nature. She'll outgrow it. Will she? Or will she continue the pattern into adulthood because no one ever required her to change? Look at how she treats service workers, Rebecca. Look at how she talks about her teachers. Look at how she responds when anyone asks her to do something that isn't immediately convenient for her. This isn't normal teenage self-centeredness. This is entitlement that's being reinforced by a lack of consequences. Marcus had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. Betty, I understand your concerns about Sophia's attitude, but using money to control behavior can backfire. It might make her resentful rather than respectful. I'm not trying to control her behavior. I'm trying to ensure that my support goes to someone who values what I'm offering. If Sophia would prefer to maintain her current attitude toward me, that's her choice. But choices have consequences. And one consequence of treating me with disrespect is losing access to my financial support.
What would she need to do to access the fund? Rebecca asked, her voice tight with emotion. Demonstrate genuine respect for who I am, rather than tolerance for who she thinks I should become. Stop making assumptions about my limitations and start recognizing my capabilities. Engage with me as a person with valuable perspectives rather than as a burden who needs to be managed. And how would you measure that? Through our interactions over time, through her willingness to spend time with me without treating it as an obligation, through her interest in my thoughts and experiences rather than her focus on fixing what she perceives as my problems. Rebecca returned to her chair, her expression a mixture of hurt and confusion. Mom, I feel like I don't know you anymore. The woman I thought I knew would never use money to manipulate family relationships. The woman you thought you knew was a performance I created to make you comfortable. The real me has been managing substantial wealth while letting you assume I needed your financial concern. The real me has been building your daughter's future while watching her treat me with dismissive amusement. The real me is tired of hiding her capabilities to protect other people's egos. So, what else have you been hiding? Rebecca's voice carried an edge I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. I've been hiding the fact that I financially supported your family during Marcus's early years in practice. I've been hiding the fact that I co-signed the loan for your house and structured it in a way that saved you thousands in interest payments. I've been hiding that 3 of the major clients who helped establish Marcus's reputation were referrals from my financial network. Marcus's face went white. The Morrison account? The Riverside development deal? The Patterson estate planning? All referrals from associates of mine who needed legal services and trusted my recommendation. But why? Rebecca asked. Why help us without telling us?
Why let us think we were succeeding entirely on our own? Because I wanted you to have confidence in your abilities. I wanted you to believe in yourselves without questioning whether your success was earned or given. I wanted to protect you from the pressure that comes with knowing someone else is making your achievements possible. And now? Now, I'm tired of protecting people from the truth. I'm tired of hiding my capabilities to make others feel better about themselves. I'm tired of being seen as less than I am because it's more comfortable for everyone else. Rebecca was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. I don't understand any of this. I feel like my whole life has been a lie. Your life hasn't been a lie. Your achievements are real. Your success is earned. Your happiness is genuine. The only lie has been my pretense that I needed your care and concern rather than your respect and appreciation. Marcus reached across the table to cover my hand with his. Betty, I don't know what to say. I'm grateful for everything you've done for us, but I'm also struggling to understand why you felt you had to hide it. Because the moment people know you have money, everything changes. They start calculating what you might give them, what you should give them, what they deserve from you. They stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource. They make assumptions about your obligations and their entitlements. We wouldn't have done that, Rebecca protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Wouldn't you? When you learned that Sophia's college fund contains over $600,000, what was your first thought? Relief that you wouldn't have to worry about paying for her education? Gratitude for my generosity? Or anger that I was attaching conditions to something you now see as Sophia's due? Rebecca was quiet, and I could see in her expression that I'd identified her reaction accurately. This is exactly why I kept my wealth private, I continued, because the moment you know about it, you stop seeing it as my money that I choose to share and start seeing it as family money that belongs to all of us by right. But we are family, Rebecca said quietly. Doesn't that create some obligations? It creates the obligation to treat each other with respect, honesty, and kindness. It doesn't create the obligation for me to fund your lives while accepting dismissive treatment in return. Marcus was reviewing the financial documents again, shaking his head slowly. Betty, the level of financial planning you've done here is extraordinary. You've created multiple trusts, established tax-advantaged accounts, structured your investments to minimize risk while maximizing growth. This isn't the work of someone who needs assistance managing her affairs. No, it isn't. But that's exactly how you've all been treating me. Like someone whose judgment is questionable, whose capabilities are limited, whose decisions need to be guided by younger, more knowledgeable family members. I never meant to make you feel that way, Rebecca said. I know you didn't, but intentions don't always align with impact. And the impact of your assumptions about my limitations has been to make me feel invisible in my own family. So, what happens now? Marcus asked. How do we move forward from here? That depends on whether you can see me as I actually am, rather than as you assumed I was. It depends on whether you can respect my choices, even when they don't align with your preferences. It depends on whether you can value my perspectives, even when they differ from current trends. Rebecca wiped her eyes with her napkin, smearing her makeup but looking more real than she had all evening. Mom, I need time to process all of this. It's like discovering that someone I've known my whole life is actually a completely different person. I'm not a different person. I'm the same person I've always been, but without the mask I've been wearing to make you comfortable. Will you give us time to adjust to this new understanding? Of course, but I won't go back to pretending to be less than I am, and I won't continue to accept treatment that's based on false assumptions about my capabilities or limitations. As they prepared to leave that evening, Marcus pulled me aside for a private conversation. Betty, I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for what you've accomplished, both financially and in raising Rebecca to be the woman she is today. I'm sorry if we've made you feel undervalued. Thank you, Marcus. That means more to me than you might realize. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you revealing all of this now? What changed? I thought about his question, considering how much to share about the loneliness I'd been feeling, the growing sense that I was disappearing even from my own life. I realized that hiding who I am wasn't protecting anyone. It was just creating distance between me and the people I love. And I decided that I'd rather be respected for who I really am than loved for who I'm pretending to be. Marcus nodded slowly. That takes courage. It takes courage to continue pretending, too, but I'm tired of that kind of courage. After they left, I sat in my quiet house, surrounded by the dishes from dinner and the evidence of the evening's revelations. The financial documents were still scattered across the table, tangible proof of the conversation that had changed everything. I felt lighter, somehow, as if I'd been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there. For the first time in years, I'd told the complete truth about who I was and what I'd accomplished. The reactions had been mixed, but they'd been honest. No more careful performances, no more protective deceptions. Sunday morning brought a text from Sophia. Can we talk? I smiled at the message, noting that she'd managed to type the entire thing without a single capital letter or piece of punctuation. Some things, apparently, were harder to change than others. Of course, sweetheart. When would you like to meet? Today, if possible. I have some things I want to say to you. We arranged to meet at the park near her house, the same place where I'd pushed her on swings when she was small and taught her to ride a bike when she was 7. I arrived early and sat on the bench where George and I used to watch her play, remembering afternoons when life felt simpler and relationships felt more secure. Sophia arrived exactly on time, which surprised me. She was usually late to everything, claiming that punctuality was an outdated concept that didn't account for modern life's complexity. Today, though, she seemed to understand that this conversation required a different level of attention. She sat beside me on the bench, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. For several minutes, we watched other families enjoying the park. Parents pushing toddlers on swings, older children playing soccer, teenagers gathered around picnic tables, sharing whatever drama was currently consuming their lives. Grandma, I've been thinking about what Mom told me last night. About the money and the conditions and everything. What are your thoughts? I'm confused and kind of angry, but also kind of impressed. Like, I had no idea you were so successful, independent, smart about money and stuff. Why does that surprise you? Sophia was quiet for a moment, watching a young mother help her daughter across the monkey bars. I guess because you always seemed like you needed help with things. Like you were struggling to keep up with the way things are done now. And now?
Now I'm wondering if maybe you weren't struggling to keep up. Maybe you just didn't want to keep up. Maybe you were choosing to do things differently. What made you realize that? The college fund. Mom said you've been putting money into it every month since I was born. That's like 17 years of planning for my future. Someone who's struggling to keep up with modern life doesn't do 17 years of financial planning. I felt a surge of hope at her reasoning. Maybe she was capable of the kind of perspective shifts I'd been hoping for. Sophia, can I ask you something? Sure. When you called me a dinosaur for my texting style, what were you trying to accomplish? She considered the question seriously, which was more than I'd expected. I thought I was helping you communicate better, like showing you how to fit in more. But what if I don't want to fit in the way you define fitting in? Then I guess I was trying to fix something that wasn't broken. And how do you think that made me feel? Sophia shifted on the bench, drawing her knees up to her chest in a gesture that reminded me of the little girl she'd been not so long ago. Grandma, I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't mean to make you feel bad about yourself. I just wanted to help you connect better with people. I know you did, but Sophia, I connect just fine with people. Maybe not in the ways you prefer, but in ways that work for me and for the relationships I value. So when I try to change how you do things, I'm basically saying that my way is better than your way. How does that feel to you when someone does it to you? Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Annoying. Like they think I'm doing everything wrong. Exactly. But Grandma, some things really are better now than they used to be. Like technology has made a lot of things easier and more efficient. You're absolutely right. And I use technology when it makes my life better. I bank online, I email, I research investments using internet resources. But I also choose not to use technology in ways that don't improve my experience. Like what? Like abbreviating text messages when I have time to write complete thoughts, like multitasking during conversations when I prefer to focus on one person at a time, like using apps to manage my calendar when I prefer the visual clarity of a paper calendar. So it's not that you can't do those things, you just don't want to. Right. And when you assume I can't, rather than recognizing that I won't, you're making assumptions about my capabilities instead of respecting my choices. Sophia hugged her knees tighter. I never thought about it like that. I just figured that if there was an easier way to do something, everyone would want to do it the easier way. But what's easier for you might not be easier for me. What feels efficient to you might feel impersonal to me.
What seems modern to you might seem shallow to me. So how do I know the difference? Ask me. Instead of assuming I need improvement, ask me about my reasoning. Instead of mocking my choices, try to understand them. Give me the same courtesy you'd want if someone was questioning your decisions. Sophia unwrapped her arms from around her legs and turned to face me directly. Grandma, about the college fund. Mom said you're making access to it conditional on how I treat you. That's correct. Can you tell me exactly what that means? Like, what would I need to do differently? I appreciated her directness. It suggested she was taking the situation seriously rather than dismissing it as an overreaction. Stop treating me like a burden who needs to be managed. Start treating me like a person whose perspectives might have value. Stop assuming that newer is automatically better and start considering that different approaches might have merit. Stop mocking my choices and start respecting them, even when you don't understand them. And if I do those things, I get access to the college fund? If you do those things consistently over time, and if our relationship improves as a result, then yes, the money will be available for your education. And if I don't, then you'll fund your own college education, the same way millions of other students do, through scholarships, loans, work-study programs, community college transfers. It's challenging, but it's entirely possible. Sophia was quiet for several minutes processing this information. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller than usual. Grandma, I don't want you to think I only care about you because of the money. I didn't even know about the money until yesterday. I don't think that, sweetheart. I think you care about me, but I also think you've fallen into patterns of treating me with casual disrespect because there have never been consequences for that behavior. What if I try to change, but I mess up sometimes? What if I slip back into old habits? Then you keep trying. Change is a process, not a single decision. I'm not expecting perfection. I'm expecting effort and growth over time. Can you give me some examples of what you mean by treating you with respect? I thought about the specific behaviors that had been bothering me, the patterns I wanted to see change. When you disagree with my choices, ask me about my reasoning instead of immediately trying to change them. When you want to help me with something, ask if I want help instead of assuming I need it. When we're having a conversation, put your phone away and give me your full attention. When I share my thoughts or experiences, respond to them instead of immediately changing the subject to something you find more interesting. Those seem like reasonable things. They are reasonable things. They're the same things you'd expect from people who care about you. Grandma, can I tell you something? Of course. I think maybe I've been kind of selfish. Like, I've been so focused on what I think you should be doing that I never really thought about what you might want to be doing or what you might be good at that I don't know about. What made you realize that? The college fund and the stuff Mom told me about your investments and how you've been helping our family financially for years. It made me realize that there's a lot about you that I don't know. And maybe the reason I don't know those things is because I never asked. What would you like to know? Everything. Like, what was it like growing up in the 50s? What did you want to be when you were my age? How did you learn about investing? What's the most exciting thing you've ever done? What do you think about when you're by yourself? For the next 2 hours, we sat on that bench in the park while I told Sophia stories about my life that I hadn't shared with anyone in years, about growing up in a time when young women had limited career options but unlimited determination, about meeting her grandfather and knowing immediately that he was someone special, about the early years of our marriage when we had more dreams than money but somehow made everything work. I told her about my first job at the bank when female employees weren't allowed to wear pants and had to quit if they got married. About the satisfaction I'd felt when I'd proven I could understand investments and financial planning as well as any of my male colleagues. About the night George and I had stayed up until dawn calculating whether we could afford to buy our first house and the pride we'd felt when we realized we could. Sophia listened with an attention I hadn't seen from her in years, asking questions that showed she was really thinking about what I was telling her. When I described the time George and I had driven cross-country to see all the national parks, she wanted to know which ones had been my favorites and whether I'd ever considered traveling like that again. When I mentioned the investment club I'd belonged to in the 80s, she was curious about how we'd research stocks without the internet. Grandma, you've had such an interesting life. I had no idea you'd done so many cool things. Why do you think you didn't know about them? Because I never asked. And because I guess I thought that nothing interesting had happened before I was born. That's not unusual for someone your age, but it's something you might want to think about changing. I want to. I want to know more about you and Grandpa and what your life was like before me and Tyler. I'd be happy to share those stories with you. As we prepared to leave the park, Sophia turned to me with an expression that was more serious than I usually saw from her. Grandma, I want to try to be better about treating you with respect. Not because of the college fund, but because you deserve it. And because I think I've been missing out on knowing someone pretty amazing. Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me. Can I ask you one more thing? Of course. Would you be willing to teach me about investing? Like the stuff you know about money and planning for the future? I know I'm going to need to understand that stuff someday, and I'd rather learn it from someone who's actually good at it than from some random class. I felt my heart swell with unexpected joy. I would love that. Even if I'm terrible at it at first? Especially if you're terrible at it at first. That means there's room for growth. As I drove home from the park, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just hope that Sophia might change her behavior toward me, but hope that we might actually build a different kind of relationship. One based on mutual respect rather than casual tolerance. One where she saw me as a resource for wisdom and experience rather than an obstacle to efficiency and modernity. The conversation had revealed something important about my granddaughter. Underneath the entitled teenager was a young woman capable of self-reflection and growth. She just needed to be challenged to look beyond her assumptions and consider different perspectives. That evening, I received a text from Rebecca. "Betty, Marcus and I talked for hours last night about everything you shared with us. We both want to apologize for underestimating you and for making assumptions about your capabilities. We'd like to take you to dinner this week so we can continue the conversation." For the first time in months, I felt like my family was beginning to see me as I really was. It would take time to rebuild relationships based on truth rather than comfortable fictions, but it was a start. I responded to Rebecca with a message that was longer and more formal than anything my family had received from me in years. "I would very much enjoy having dinner with you and Marcus this week. It would be wonderful to continue our conversation and explore how we might build more honest and respectful relationships going forward. Please let me know what day works best for your schedules, and I'll make reservations at a restaurant where we can talk without interruption. I look forward to seeing you both." I read the message twice before sending it, smiling at the complete sentences and proper punctuation that had once embarrassed my granddaughter. This was who I was. Someone who believed words mattered, who took time to express herself clearly, and who valued substance over speed. If my family was going to know the real me, they would have to accept all of me, including my dinosaur texting habits. And maybe, just maybe, they might even come to appreciate them. The systematic dismantling of my old life began on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after my conversation with Sophia in the park. I had given everyone time to process the revelations about my financial situation, time to adjust their perceptions and demonstrate whether they could truly see me differently. The results had been mixed at best. Rebecca and Marcus had taken me to dinner as promised, and the conversation had been cordial but cautious. They'd expressed gratitude for my years of hidden support and apologized for underestimating my capabilities. But underneath their polite words, I could sense a recalculation happening. They were reassessing every interaction we'd had, every decision I'd made, through the lens of my wealth rather than my character. The gratitude felt performative, tainted by the knowledge that their financial security had depended on my generosity. Sophia had made genuine efforts to change her behavior. She'd started asking about my opinions instead of offering unsolicited advice. She'd put her phone away during our conversations and seemed genuinely interested in the stories I shared about my past. But there was still an underlying sense that she was working to meet conditions rather than naturally evolving into respect. Every interaction felt like a test she was taking rather than a relationship she was building. Tyler, my younger grandson, had reacted to the news with typical 14-year-old pragmatism. His main question had been whether this meant the family was rich now, and when I explained that the money was mine rather than theirs, he'd shrugged and returned to his video games. His indifference was almost refreshing compared to the calculated responses of the adults. But it was the phone call I received that Tuesday morning that crystallized my growing realization that knowledge alone wouldn't change the fundamental dynamics in my family. The caller was Jennifer Morrison, Rebecca's best friend from college, and the wife of one of Marcus's law partners. "Betty, I hope you don't mind me calling," Jennifer said, her voice carrying that artificial sweetness people used when they wanted something. "Rebecca mentioned that you've been doing well financially, and I wondered if we might discuss an investment opportunity that could benefit both of us."
I listened as Jennifer outlined her husband's plan to purchase a small office building downtown. They needed additional investors to make the deal work, and she thought I might be interested in getting involved. The proposal was presented as a favor to me, an opportunity to grow my wealth while helping friends succeed. It's really a win-win situation. You'd earn excellent returns while supporting local business development, and of course, having you as an investor would give us the credibility we need with the bank. I thanked Jennifer for thinking of me and promised to consider her proposal. But as I hung up the phone, I realized that Rebecca had shared information about my financial situation beyond our immediate family. Within weeks of learning the truth, my daughter had been discussing my wealth with friends, presenting it as family news rather than personal information I'd chosen to reveal. The phone call rang again an hour later. This time it was Jennifer Chen, a woman from my book club who I'd known casually for years. "Betty, dear, I heard the most interesting news about your investment success, and I was wondering if you might have some advice about my retirement portfolio. My financial advisor has been suggesting some changes that seem quite aggressive, and I thought someone with your expertise might help me evaluate them." Another referral from Rebecca, clearly. Another person who now saw me as a resource to be tapped rather than a friend to be enjoyed. The third call came from David Sullivan, my neighbor of 15 years. David had always been friendly in the distant way of suburban neighbors, but now his voice carried a familiarity that felt presumptuous. "Betty, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I heard you've done quite well with investments over the years. My son Kevin is starting his own landscaping business, and we're looking for investors who might be interested in supporting a local entrepreneur. I thought you might want to get in on the ground floor of what could be a very successful venture." By Thursday, I'd received 7 more calls from people who'd somehow learned about my financial situation. Some wanted investment advice, others wanted to pitch business opportunities, and a few were more direct about requesting loans or gifts for various causes they deemed worthy. All of them approached me with the kind of casual entitlement that suggested they believed my wealth created obligations to help solve their financial problems. I realized that this was exactly what I had feared for decades, exactly why George and I chose to hide our success behind a facade of modest living. The moment people knew you had money, everything changed. Relationships became transactions, conversations became pitches, friends became supplicants. But more than that, I realized that my own family had been the source of these invasions. Rebecca had transformed my private revelation into public information, apparently believing that my wealth was family news to be shared rather than personal information to be protected.
She'd turned my trust into currency for social conversations, my vulnerability into entertainment for her social circle. Friday afternoon, I called Patricia to schedule an emergency meeting. "I need to accelerate the timeline for all the changes we discussed," I told her. "And I need to add some additional modifications that address new circumstances." Patricia's office felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos my life had become. She listened quietly as I described the phone calls, the investment pitches, the sudden interest from people who'd barely acknowledged my existence for years. "I understand your frustration," Patricia said when I finished. "Unfortunately, this is a common experience for people when their wealth becomes public knowledge. The requests usually intensify before they diminish. I want to restructure everything. Not just Sophia's college fund, but all of my estate planning. I want to create conditions that ensure my support goes only to people who valued me before they knew about my money." Patricia pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "What kind of conditions are you considering?" "I want Rebecca and Marcus removed as beneficiaries from my will until they can demonstrate genuine respect for my privacy and autonomy. I want all financial support for their family discontinued immediately. I want Sophia's college fund restructured with multiple conditions that address not just her treatment of me, but her family's treatment of my confidentiality." "Betty, these are significant changes that will have lasting impact on your family relationships. Are you certain you want to proceed?" "I'm certain that I want to be valued for who I am rather than what I have.
If that means my family relationships become more honest but less comfortable, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. We spent 3 hours restructuring my estate planning documents. The new will eliminated Rebecca and Marcus as primary beneficiaries, instead creating a charitable foundation that would support educational initiatives in our community. Rebecca would inherit my personal effects and a modest cash bequest, but the bulk of my wealth would go to causes I cared about, rather than family members who'd proven they couldn't respect my boundaries. Sophia's college fund was restructured with multiple conditions. She would need to demonstrate not just personal respect for me, but family compliance with my privacy requirements. If Rebecca continued sharing information about my financial situation without permission, Sophia would lose access to the fund regardless of her own behavior. The most difficult decision involved the ongoing financial support I had been providing to Rebecca's family. The house they lived in carried a mortgage I'd secretly guaranteed. Marcus's law practice had benefited from client referrals I'd arranged. Their comfortable lifestyle was built on a foundation of my hidden assistance. I want all of that support withdrawn, I told Patricia. The mortgage guarantee, the client referrals, the emergency fund I established for their use. Everything. The mortgage guarantee can't be withdrawn without triggering immediate consequences, Patricia warned. If you remove your guarantee, the bank will likely demand immediate restructuring of their loan terms. They may not qualify for the same interest rate or payment schedule without your backing. Then they'll learn to live within their actual means rather than the means I've been secretly providing. And the client referrals? I'll contact each of the clients I referred to Marcus and explain that I'm transitioning my business relationships to other attorneys. I'll provide appropriate notice and recommendations for alternative legal counsel, but I won't continue to channel business towards someone who can't respect my privacy. Patricia completed the paperwork with her usual efficiency, but I could see concern in her expression. Betty, I want to make sure you understand the potential consequences of these changes. Your family's financial situation will change dramatically and immediately. There may be significant stress and conflict as they adjust to new circumstances. There's already stress and conflict. At least now it will be honest stress and conflict rather than the artificial harmony that's been built on my silent sacrifices. What about Sophia? Her college plans may be affected if she can't meet the new conditions for accessing her fund. Then she'll learn that actions have consequences and that respect isn't optional in relationships that matter. Those are valuable lessons that will serve her well in adulthood. Patricia filed the documents that afternoon, and by Monday morning, the changes were in effect. I spent the weekend preparing for the conversations that would inevitably follow. The first indication that my family had noticed the changes came Tuesday morning in the form of a panicked phone call from Marcus. Betty, I just heard from the bank about our mortgage. They're saying there's been a change in our guarantee status and they need to meet with us immediately. Do you know what this might be about? Yes, Marcus, I do. I've withdrawn my financial guarantee for your mortgage. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. You've withdrawn your guarantee? But Betty, we didn't even know you were guaranteeing our mortgage. How can you withdraw something we didn't know existed? The same way I could provide it without your knowledge. It was my choice to offer the guarantee, and it's my choice to withdraw it. But this will affect our interest rate, our payment schedule, our entire financial picture. We structured our budget based on the terms we have now. Then you'll need to restructure your budget based on the terms you can actually qualify for without my assistance. Marcus's voice took on the tone he used in court when making legal arguments. Betty, this seems like a rather extreme response to whatever has upset you. Surely we can discuss this and work out a solution that doesn't disrupt our family stability. Our family stability was disrupted the moment Rebecca decided to share confidential information about my finances with her friends and neighbors. I've spent the past week fielding calls from people who want to access my money for various investments and causes. All of these people learned about my financial situation through Rebecca. I'm sure Rebecca didn't mean any harm. She was probably just excited about your success and wanted to share good news. My financial information isn't good news to be shared. It's private information that I chose to reveal to my family in confidence. Rebecca violated that confidence, and there are consequences for that choice. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes with Marcus alternating between legal reasoning and emotional appeals. He pointed out that their mortgage payments would increase significantly without my guarantee. He reminded me of Tyler's orthodontic bills and Sophia's senior year expenses. He emphasized how much they had counted on my support, even when they hadn't known they were receiving it. I listened to his arguments with the patience I'd developed over decades of managing financial negotiations. When he finished, I responded with the clarity I'd been practicing.
Marcus, everything you've described represents the natural consequences of living beyond your actual means. The mortgage payments you'll face are the payments you would have had originally without my intervention. The expenses you're worried about are expenses you should have been planning for based on your real income, rather than the enhanced income my referrals provided. You've been living in an artificial economy that I created and maintained, and now you're experiencing the reality of your actual financial position. But Betty, we never asked for your help. We didn't know we were living beyond our means because we didn't know you were supplementing our income. You didn't ask because you didn't know you needed to ask. But you also didn't question your good fortune or wonder why everything seemed to work out so easily for you. You simply accepted the benefits without examining their source. The call ended with Marcus promising to discuss the situation with Rebecca and asking for time to develop a response to the new circumstances. I granted him that time while knowing that no amount of discussion would change my position. Rebecca called that evening, her voice tight with emotion and barely controlled anger. Mom, Marcus told me about the mortgage situation. I need to understand what's happening and why you're punishing us for something I don't even understand I did wrong. Rebecca, you shared confidential information about my finances with people outside our family. Information I specifically revealed to you in a private conversation. I mentioned to a few friends that you'd done well with investments. I didn't share specific numbers or personal details. I was proud of you and wanted people to know that my mother was more successful than anyone realized. Who specifically did you tell? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Jennifer, of course, and Marguerite from your book club because she mentioned being worried about her retirement planning. And David Sullivan because he was talking about Kevin's business and I thought you might want to know about a local investment opportunity. Anyone else? Maybe a couple of other people in casual conversation. But, Mom, these are friends and neighbors, not strangers. I wasn't gossiping or violating your privacy. I was sharing family news. My financial information isn't family news, Rebecca. It's personal information that affects my safety, my privacy, and my autonomy. The moment you shared it, I started receiving calls from people who want something from me. Investment pitches, loan requests, business opportunities, requests for financial advice, all because you decided my private information was appropriate for public conversation. I didn't know that would happen. I didn't think people would approach you directly. What did you think would happen when you told people that your mother had significantly more money than anyone realized? Rebecca was silent for a moment, apparently considering the question seriously for the first time. I guess I thought they'd be impressed. I wanted them to see you as successful and capable, instead of as the struggling widow they probably assumed you were. And did it occur to you to ask whether I wanted their impressions of me to change? No, I thought you'd want people to know how successful you've been. Rebecca, I spent decades hiding my success specifically to avoid the kinds of interactions I've been having this week. I chose privacy over recognition because I valued my autonomy over other people's admiration.
When you shared my information without permission, you took away my choice about how to manage my own life. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I didn't understand that you wanted to keep it private from everyone. I thought you just hadn't told people because you didn't want to seem like you were bragging. And now you understand differently? Now I understand that you made a deliberate choice to protect your privacy, and I violated that choice without thinking about the consequences. What do you think should happen now? Rebecca was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than usual. I think I need to figure out how to fix this. I need to contact everyone I told and ask them not to approach you about financial matters. I need to respect your privacy going forward. And I need to accept whatever consequences you think are appropriate for breaking your trust. The consequences are already in effect, Rebecca. Marcus told you about the mortgage guarantee. There are also other forms of support that I've withdrawn, and there will be ongoing conditions for any future assistance from me. What kind of conditions? Demonstrated respect for my autonomy and privacy, proven understanding that my financial resources are mine to manage as I choose, acknowledgement that our relationship should be based on love and respect rather than financial expectations. How long would these conditions last? As long as it takes for me to trust that you see me as a person rather than as a resource. As long as it takes for our relationship to become genuinely equal rather than artificially dependent. The conversation continued past midnight, covering ground we'd never explored in our relationship. Rebecca asked questions about my financial decisions that revealed how little she'd understood about my capabilities and motivations. I shared concerns about our family dynamics that I'd been suppressing for years. By the time we hung up, we hadn't resolved anything, but we'd established a foundation for honest communication that had been missing from our relationship. Rebecca understood that her actions had consequences beyond what she'd intended. I understood that her motivations had been loving, even when her methods were thoughtless. But understanding didn't eliminate consequences. The mortgage situation would still need to be resolved. The client relationships I'd been maintaining for Marcus's benefit would still be redirected. The financial safety net I'd provided for their family would still be removed. Wednesday morning brought a different kind of phone call. Sophia's voice was strained, unusual for someone who typically approached problems with teenage confidence. "Grandma, can we meet? Something happened at school yesterday that I need to talk to you about." We met at the same park where we'd had our breakthrough conversation weeks earlier. Sophia looked older somehow, as if recent events had forced a maturity she hadn't been ready for.
Grandma, kids at school are talking about our family having money. Someone's parents must have heard something and told them. They're asking me questions about whether it's true, whether you're really rich, whether my college is paid for. I felt a familiar surge of anger at Rebecca's inability to contain confidential information, but I focused on Sophia's immediate concern. How are you handling those questions? I don't know what to say. I mean, I know about the college fund now, but I don't know how much detail I should share or whether I should share anything at all. And some kids are being weird about it, like they think I've been lying about our family situation or something. What kinds of weird behavior? Like, Jessica asked me why I work at the ice cream shop if my family has money. And Brad made some comment about how it must be nice to not have to worry about college debt. And Emma wanted to know if you could help her family with some financial problem they're having. I watched Sophia's face as she described these interactions, seeing the confusion and discomfort that came with sudden exposure to the complications of wealth. How do you want to handle these situations going forward? I don't know. I've never had to deal with anything like this before. I don't want people to treat me differently because of something I didn't even know about until recently. But I also don't want to lie about our family situation.
You don't have to lie, but you also don't have to provide detailed explanations about private family matters. You can tell people that your grandmother is financially secure and leave it at that. But what about the college fund? If I end up using it, people will know that I had help paying for school. This was exactly the kind of complexity I hoped to protect Sophia from, exactly why I'd planned to reveal the fund privately rather than allowing it to become general knowledge. Sophia, that depends on whether you'll have access to the fund. The conditions for accessing it have become more stringent since our family's privacy was compromised. What do you mean? I explained the new requirements Patricia had built into the trust, including the provision that Sophia's access to the fund would be affected by her family's respect for my privacy boundaries. So, because Mom told people about your money, I might lose my college fund? Because your mother violated my trust and created problems I specifically tried to avoid, there are now additional requirements for accessing family financial support. Sophia was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. When she spoke, her voice carried a seriousness I'd rarely heard from her. Grandma, that doesn't seem fair. I can't control what Mom does or says. Why should I be punished for her mistakes? You're not being punished, Sophia. You're experiencing the natural consequences of living in a family system where actions affect multiple people. Your mother's choices have created complications for everyone, including you. But I've been trying to change how I treat you. I've been working to meet the original conditions you set. Now there are new conditions based on things I can't control. Life often works that way, Sophia. We're affected by other people's choices, whether we participate in them or not. The question is how you choose to respond to circumstances you didn't create. What do you mean? You could accept that these complications are beyond your control and focus on what you can control. You could talk to your mother about the impact her choices have had on your opportunities. You could demonstrate the kind of maturity and responsibility that shows you're ready for the privileges that come with family support. Or you could decide that the conditions are too difficult or unfair and plan to fund your college education independently. That's a completely valid choice that many students make. Sophia sat quietly on the park bench, watching a group of younger children play on equipment she'd outgrown years ago. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a resolve I hadn't expected. Grandma, I want to try to meet the conditions, not just the ones about how I treat you, but the ones about family behavior too. I want to talk to Mom about being more careful with private information. I want to try to fix what got broken. Why? Because I've learned things about you over the past few weeks that have changed how I see our relationship. I don't want to lose the chance to keep learning, and because I think maybe our whole family needs to learn how to respect each other better. That's a mature perspective, Sophia. It doesn't feel mature. It feels hard and complicated and kind of scary. Most mature perspectives do. We spent another hour talking about strategies for handling the social complications at school, ways to protect family privacy while maintaining friendships, and methods for encouraging better communication within our family. Sophia asked thoughtful questions about financial planning and investment strategies, showing genuine interest in understanding the skills that had enabled my success. As we prepared to leave the park, Sophia turned to me with an expression that reminded me of the curious little girl she'd been before teenage social pressures had made her dismissive of adult perspectives. Grandma, can I ask you something kind of personal? Of course. Do you ever regret keeping your success secret for so long? Like, do you think things would have been better if you'd been honest from the beginning? I considered her question carefully, thinking about the decades of careful performance, the hidden sacrifices, the relationships built on incomplete information. I think every choice has costs and benefits, sweetheart. Keeping my wealth private protected my autonomy and allowed our relationships to develop naturally. But it also created distance and misunderstanding that we're dealing with now. Do you think our family would have been different if we'd known the truth? Probably, but different doesn't necessarily mean better. People often change when they know someone has money, and those changes aren't always positive. Like how people at school are treating me differently now. Exactly like that. So, what do you think is the right approach going forward? I think honesty is usually better than deception, but honesty requires maturity from everyone involved. People need to be able to handle the truth responsibly. And you think our family is ready for that kind of honesty now?
I looked at this thoughtful young woman who'd grown so much in just a few weeks, who was grappling with complexities that would challenge adults twice her age. I think you're ready, Sophia. I hope the rest of the family will learn to be ready too. The following weeks brought a cascade of consequences that rippled through every aspect of my family's life. Marcus and Rebecca met with their mortgage lender and discovered that without my guarantee, their interest rate would increase by 2 percentage points, and their monthly payments would rise by nearly $800. They would need to refinance their home or consider selling and moving to something more affordable. The 3 major clients I'd referred to Marcus's law practice received professional letters explaining that I was transitioning my business relationships to other attorneys. I provided recommendations for alternative legal counsel and ensured smooth transitions for ongoing cases. Marcus's revenue dropped by approximately 40%, almost immediately. Rebecca was forced to have uncomfortable conversations with the friends and neighbors she'd shared my information with, explaining that I preferred privacy about financial matters and asking them not to approach me with requests or proposals. Some of these conversations damaged relationships that had taken years to build. Tyler, my younger grandson, reacted to the family's financial stress with typical teenage adaptability. He got a part-time job at a local grocery store and started paying for his own entertainment expenses. He seemed almost relieved to have concrete ways to contribute to the family's new economic reality. But it was Sophia who surprised me most during this period of adjustment. Instead of complaining about the additional conditions attached to her college fund, she threw herself into research about scholarship opportunities and part-time job possibilities. She started a savings account with money from her ice cream shop job and began tracking college costs with the same attention to detail I'd taught her about investment planning. More importantly, she began taking active steps to address the family dynamics that had created our current situation. She organized a family meeting where she confronted Rebecca about the privacy violations and their impact on everyone's opportunities. "Mom, Grandma trusted us with private information and you shared it without permission," Sophia said during that difficult conversation. "Now, I might lose my college fund, Marcus might lose his business clients, and our whole family is dealing with financial stress because you couldn't keep confidential information confidential." Rebecca's response revealed how much she'd been struggling with the consequences of her choices. "Sophia, I never intended for any of this to happen. I was proud of your grandmother and wanted people to see her as successful rather than struggling." "But it wasn't your choice to make," Sophia replied. "Grandma chose privacy for good reasons. When you took away that choice, you hurt everyone in our family." The conversation was painful, but necessary, forcing Rebecca to confront the gap between her intentions and the impact of her actions. She apologized to the family and to me personally, acknowledging that she'd violated trust in ways she was still learning to understand. But apologies, while necessary, weren't sufficient to undo the damage. The financial stress on Rebecca and Marcus's household was real and immediate. Their comfortable lifestyle, built on a foundation of my hidden support, was no longer sustainable. They faced choices between downsizing their home, changing Tyler's school district, and eliminating expenses they'd considered essential. Marcus began working longer hours to compensate for lost clients, taking cases he might have refused in the past and accepting lower fees than his previous standards had required. The stress affected his health and his relationship with Rebecca, creating tension that spread throughout the family.
Rebecca took a part-time evening job at a local retail store, something she hadn't done since before Sophia was born. The additional income helped with immediate expenses, but the schedule left her exhausted and emotionally strained. Through all of these adjustments, I maintained my position with compassionate firmness. I was available for emotional support and practical advice, but I didn't rescue them from the natural consequences of living beyond their actual means. I watched my family struggle with the reality of their financial situation while resisting the urge to solve their problems with the wealth they now knew I possessed. The most difficult moments came when Tyler asked why I wouldn't help their parents with their mortgage payments, or when Rebecca broke down crying over bills she couldn't pay with her previous budget. But I understood that sustainable change required them to learn to live within their real means rather than the artificial means I'd been providing. Sophia continued to meet the evolving conditions for accessing her college fund, demonstrating not just personal respect for me, but active efforts to improve family communication and protect privacy boundaries. She proved capable of the maturity and responsibility I'd hoped to encourage. But as autumn deepened into winter, I began to question whether the lessons I was teaching were worth the pain they were causing. My family was learning important truths about financial reality, personal responsibility, and mutual respect. But they were also struggling with stress, conflict, and uncertainty that affected their health and happiness. The question that kept me awake at night was whether I was helping them grow into better people or simply punishing them for failing to meet standards they'd never known existed. The line between natural consequences and vindictive control was thinner than I'd expected, and I found myself constantly examining my motivations and questioning my methods. But there was no going back to the comfortable deceptions that had defined our relationships for many years. We were all different people now, forced to see each other more clearly and relate more honestly. The question was whether these new relationships would prove stronger than the old ones, or whether honesty would ultimately cost us more than deception ever had. 2 years later, I stood in the graduation venue watching Sophia receive her high school diploma. She'd earned a partial academic scholarship and would attend State University in the fall. The college fund remained available to her, conditions met through genuine growth rather than performative compliance. Rebecca and Marcus had rebuilt their lives on honest foundations. They'd downsized to a home they could actually afford, but their marriage had strengthened through shared struggle. Marcus's law practice thrived with clients who valued his integrity over connections. Tyler had flourished with increased responsibility, developing work ethic and financial literacy that would serve him well. He'd started his own small business, tutoring younger students, and took pride in contributing to family expenses. The relationships in our family had evolved into something more authentic than what we had before. Conversations were deeper, respect was genuine, and love was based on truth rather than comfortable illusions. I still lived simply, still texted in complete sentences, still chose substance over speed. But now my family understood these were choices rather than limitations. They saw strength where they once saw struggle, wisdom where they once saw stubbornness. Sophia approached me after the ceremony, diploma in hand and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for not giving up on us, Grandma. Thank you for teaching us that respect isn't negotiable." As we walked together towards the parking lot, she pulled out her phone to text her friends about celebration plans. I noticed she took time to write complete sentences with proper punctuation. When I raised an eyebrow, she smiled. "I learned from the best dinosaur I know." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.